Lovely. Well, good afternoon. How we doing?
Good.
Fully aware, I'm doing great. We are going to lean heavily into the postprandial glaze in short order, so I'll try to make it interactive so that this does not turn into PEA or anything of the sort. So my name is Derek Miller. I'm from the Jaycee Burn Center. I've been there since 2004. Most of that time was bedside staffing. Stepped away for about 5-6 years to do hospital education for the other ICUs and step downs in the ED, but came back in January to do an outreach-focused role. If any of you have been in the paramedic or pre-hospital game for a long time, you might have met my predecessor, Ernie Grant. Anybody met Ernie? So he retired in 2018. I call him a long-lost brother from another mother because we look like twins, basically, right? Except not. The only reason he retired is to become the sitting president of the American Nurses Association. Huge feather in our cap. So to bring nursing voice and burn prevention and burn care voice to the American Nurses Association. So my intention here is to really focus on some things that are burn specific, but I'll tell you what the secret sauce is already, and this is what you encounter on a daily basis. Burns are just one flavor of trauma. So I want you to keep in mind, I'm going to go back to that thorough trauma assessment approach that you would have in a pre-hospital TLS course, that I don't want the burn to distract you from doing by the book, by the numbers, so you don't miss other traumas that may kill the patient or put them at risk before the burn injury itself does that. We'll return to that a couple of times. So you guys have a digital copy of this that I've pushed out with Pam and Leslie and so forth. What I have given you paper copy, however, is kind of the Cliff Notes version of this, of what I think are salient points. And so, if I'm not mistaken, they were made single page copies, so the back side of those are nice and blank. My intention was you would have plenty of room to write things that land particularly for you, okay? And just so I know my audience, all paramedics, anybody not a paramedic, okay? And what are my backgrounds here?
I don't have
No background at all? You just walk in off the street? No.
Just my first EMS job.
Okay, awesome.
EMT basic.
Basics?
AEMG.
Okay, lovely. So a little bit of a mixed group, but everybody in the pre-hospital scenario. Yep. Okay. So full disclosure, I have worked with pre-hospital personnel my entire career, but I am not one, so I am acutely aware of the blinders that I have. So my folks who have practiced for a long time and are seasoned, please weigh in with your own clinical observations, your own teaching points, the clinical pearls. I'd like to make it meaningful, add some value for you. Wherever you are, if this is your first gig or whether you've done this for 20, 30 years, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll point out that this is, of course, my work email address, UNC's Jaycee Burn Center, hour and 15 minutes away, etc. You're lucky in the sense of most places in the country don't have a burn center an hour away. Okay, so we are a close resource, happy to partner in any way, shape, or form. How many folks have taken a burn patient to UNC? Okay. How many folks have taken a burn patient to Cape Fear Valley? Okay. So those are your two basic flavors, right? We know that burns are one flavor of trauma, and it might be severe enough that we know from the get-go they need to be going right on up to Chapel Hill, or it might be something that we can stabilize, polytrauma, or whatever's going on with Cape Fear Valley. At the beginning of September, I did give a presentation, a condensed version of this to Dr. Marcia Nelson, who's the trauma director, and all of the providers, the ER trauma physicians affiliated with Cape Fear, as well as, Robson Sampson. So I'm hopefully giving a consistent, congruent message. This is my personal cell phone number. If you have questions beyond today, unanswered questions or what to do in this situation, blah, 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 certainly you feel free to text or call. In addition, there's a helpful hints sheet, and it's also in your slides and your information on the back page. The transfer center you're well versed with for dispatch to contact for interfacility transfer. And I want to introduce you to the outpatient clinic as an underutilized resource that you have at your fingertips. So I titled this Continuum of Burn Care because I know obviously you guys are interested in the initial or the emergent care right after injury. However, I just want you to appreciate it's not just that. Just some food for thought, easy for me to say, but there are ways for anybody to be involved on the prevention side. So let me just ask, is anybody here in any way, shape, or form involved with injury prevention efforts, whether through the job or through other avenues? Sometimes have somebody for their scouting group or church or whatever. I'm just going to offer this as a thought. I'm going to continue to point you to resources beyond the burn part, just to keep pushing the needle with what resources are available, what you utilize. So, anybody follow this website, EMS World? Okay. So, it's a great resource. Pam, I think you were nodding. So, it's a great place to kind of see what other institutions are doing nationally and internationally, to see what trends are, cutting edge, see what research is, to see proof of concept for other things. This one I found interesting. It was in March of this year, so Mount Sinai, I obviously don't practice there, but they switched gears and they wanted to embrace a model to get their paramedics involved in the community, in this case specifically for seniors at risk during the pandemic, and it yielded great results. So I'll just offer the prevention piece. Of course, for seniors, what are you most concerned about for senior citizens in terms of injury more broadly? Yeah, right, it's slips, trips, and falls, to use that language from fire and life safety educators. I've been remiss. Does anybody play double duty with PJ McLamb's group, the Fayetteville Fire Department as well? Sometimes we have folks who do both services. I know that from a fire and life safety educator perspective, falls are one additional thing that we can think of that's a high injury risk for patients, in addition to burns, of course, that's near to our hearts. I'll encourage you to check out EMS World, whether for this article or for others. There's a lot of great resources in there to get your learn on. From the perspective of preventing, what are we trying to prevent? Well, let me ask you this. How many burn injuries happen annually? The answer is we don't know. We don't actually know. Interestingly enough, most people who get burned, they don't seek medical treatment, so we're inferring things, filling in the gap. Also, reporting systems differ, but our best guess is around 2 million or so nationally. The overwhelming majority of those people don't seek medical treatment. Okay, what do?
Go to CVS.
They go to CVS and get some Neosporin or whatever, or they go to the refrigerator and grab ice or butter, toothpaste, mustard. Yesterday I heard soy sauce. That was a new one for me. Right? So a whole plethora of home remedies of topical stuff in addition to ice, which we'll talk about extensively, etc. So what I want you to be aware of is people you see may have self-treated with stuff. You encounter this all the time. I bring it up for two reasons. One, that's obviously what you do in your professional capacity. Also, how many of you find yourself suddenly you are the medical expert and your friends and family ask you what should they do for X, Y, or Z randomly. You're not on the job, but whatever. So I'll encourage you to the best available resources available. Okay, I'll tell you what our initial wound care recommendations are that don't involve the condiment aisle at the food line. Okay, all right, and why we try to steer you away from, except for some limited cases, wet dressings, wet wraps, wet soaps, moist dressings, etc., and except for ice in limited circumstances as well. Okay, for the wound care piece of that. So what kinds of, I saw a lot of you raise your hands for people who treated burn injuries. What kinds of injuries have you seen? What were the mechanisms?
Hot liquid.
Hot liquids, so scald,
Gas.
gas.
Taking the radiator cap off.
Oh, okay, right.
Fireworks.
Fireworks, yeah. Grease,
Vehicle fire.
okay, MDC,
Black powder explosion.
wow, very specific. Okay, well,
Cigarette versus carburetor.
okay, all right, so cigarette versus carburetor, this does not sound fun for anybody, yes.
Propane flash.
Propane, flash,
O2 versus oxygen.
okay, the smoking on homo tube, okay, sure. So we know there's a variety of injuries, mechanisms, etiologies, however you want to call it. We have two broad buckets. If you pick fire and flame, that's door number one. That's 40-some% of most burn injuries. High 30s, that's scalds, right? So that's the two broad buckets that we've talked about. That's injuries. How about fatalities, where people actually die as a result of the injury? Okay.
Smoking and oxygen.
Well, it tends to be the smoking leading to other things catching fire, right? What we know is almost all fatalities, not just injury, but fatalities, that tends to be downstream of a residential like house fire, right? Burns can happen anywhere, but the things that kill people tends to be house fire. Now, 40 years ago, 1980 or so, there were about 6,000 deaths annually related to burns, okay, house fires. 2020 is about 3,000-ish, slightly more than half of that. So 40 years, we've cut that down to half. Any guesses as to why the actual fatality rate is less? Number one, winner, chicken dinner, smoke alarms, okay? And I'll add one adjective in there, functional smoke alarms, okay? Because we talked to the Office of State Fire Marshal, the sad stories of when there was a smoke alarm in the house, but it was still in the wrapper or whatever, or was installed, but there was no battery or whatever. So it has to be functional. So I have a thought experiment for you. I invite you to lean into the spirit of the exercise. If you'll take your paper somewhere where you can write back page, whatever, I want you to answer two questions for me, okay? And again, I invite you to lean in and to fully embrace the spirit of the exercise. Question one, and you have to write, please don't nod sagely and sit back and disengage. I want you to engage. Number one, when is the last time that you checked your smoke alarm to make sure that it worked? Actually write it down. So be humble. And if you never have, okay, write that too. Because I just want to suggest to you, if that's where most of the fatalities are coming from, and you're relying on that to save the life of you and your family, you probably want to know if it works. Okay? Secondly, thought experiment. Tonight, let us pretend that you are back at your home, you're in bed, the fire alarm, the smoke alarm rather, goes off, and you're in the middle of a nice deep sleep. Okay? What is your plan for escaping your home? What is your plan for your family to get out of your home safely? Okay, I want you to actually write it down. Okay? Things to think about as you're doing that. Okay? In a non-trivial sense. Because I can't tell you how many times I see a patient because they got out of the house, but they went back in. For the cat, for the wedding photos, for the brother, sister, wife, mother, kid, whatever, that did not come out, for the roommate that didn't come, whatever, okay? So what's your plan? Okay. Now, if you'll turn to your left and or your right, make eye contact with one of your colleagues, you might even have to turn around or whatever. I want you to tell them what your plan is. And, okay, be more specific than run, right? Because what happens if you live with more than one person? You get up and they don't. What happens if exit number one is blocked by fire, then what? So again, I want you to think through what happens.
Do the kids know what to do with
Just gotta get you
So I'll just offer this. If not everybody in your household, again, family, your roommates, whatever, if everybody doesn't know what the plan is, what happens if one gets out but not the other? And secondly, if you haven't practiced it, you don't really have a plan. I'm going to say that's especially true if you have kids. They know how to get out, where to meet, what happens if you can't get out this door, this window, whatever. Okay? I bring this up because in August, as of August, the Office of State Fire Marshal, our friends there had already told us we had already, as of August, exceeded the fire fatalities in North Carolina for the entire year of 2020. Okay? So it's a bumper crop year, but not in a good way. Again, fire fatalities, lowest hanging fruit for the most vulnerable, easiest way to make a win. Do you have a plan for getting out of your house, and is your fire alarm work, your smoke alarm work? Okay? Now, what are some of the other mechanisms of injury we've talked about? Okay, I heard a lot of flavors of scald, whether that's grease fire or the hot water for the pasta or whatever that might be. Okay? So that turns into prevention not just for you, of course, but anybody you live with. So who's at greatest risk for scalds?
children.
Yeah, kids, children, and opposite end of the age extremes as well, but mostly for kids. And incidentally, I said 40-something% for fire and flame. For the younger population, the proportion's reverse. Scald is by far the most common method of injury for younger kids, right? So I want to talk about some case studies here, just to get your brain rolling with some things here. All right, so and come back to this. Hang on. There we go. Let's talk about our friend Jaycee here. So you guys routinely answer scene calls, and you're doing all of your training kicks in. Your primary survey, your scene safety, body substance isolate, all of that stuff. This is what you do on the routine. So let us say that you are the ones responding to the scene call. This was what was communicated to the dispatch. You haven't yet seen the patient, okay? But this is what was reported. The 2-year-old grabbed the handle of the pot, the hot soup came down and got scalds here. Has anybody treated this patient? Yeah, I mean, this is not uncommon, all right? It's a classic method of injury. So, from the get-go, from prevention messaging, for you as a professional, for you as someone with family, with loved ones, as a member of the community, what kind of prevention messaging may have made a difference here? Okay, so, and again, it's easy to say, easy also to forget in the moment, the handle away from the front to the back. What else?
Don't leave it unattended.
Yeah, never leave unattended cooking, period. Okay, what else?
Gates on the kitchen.
Yeah, and this can take a variety of forms, right? Gates so that the kitchen is a no-fly zone. And if I've seen also, if the kitchen's not a no-fly zone outright, I've seen people put tape down on the floor to say this is your 3-foot radius or whatever. You're not supposed to be beyond this for the kids' sake, okay? Because they're again, the vulnerable population. What other messaging? Prevention methods. Because again, these are things that people often know, but we don't put it all together. How about instead of using the front burner, using the back burner, right? So that's a both and part, right? Grease fire. Now this was soup. How about grease fires? What are some safety messaging points for grease fire since we're headed into Thanksgiving?
Smother it.
Right, we can say this, right? So this could be literally life-changing. Instead of, because we know water is not going to be your friend, right? But smothering it, easy win. Before you start cooking, do I have the lid for that on the countertop immediately beside? Does this make sense? So it's just grab and go. Fair enough, right? Does that make sense? The reason I bring up the prevention part, I can give you easily many stories, but I'll pick, let's say, on Friday of this week, I'm going to drive to Duplin County to an elementary school.
Thinking wine, sorry.
Well, say again?
I said I was thinking wine, my bad, sorry.
Wine, ooh, Duplin Winery. Although I was introduced to Duplin Winery by one of the staffers who worked there. She was, this is God, 15 years ago. She was 18 at the time. Had a hella bad scald to her leg. Came back and volunteered for it. So whenever I drive and I see their signs, I always think, I see her face. And her dad, you guys know the Red Knights? It's basically a motorcycle group with firefighters that do rides for fundraising. Anyway, Duplin Winery. I see the signs and I think of the two of them from 15 years ago. But I'm going there to do a presentation to a third grader. Okay, the third grader he came home. There was a grease fire on the stove. His mom was asleep on the couch, so she had left unattended. Passed out, whatever, a grease fire. So he had some prevention training, right? Some messaging somehow, some way had gotten to him because he was trying to get her out of the house immediately, okay? And she did. Y'all know the rest of the story. How do people get burned? Because they don't leave, they go and they try to, so she was going to go in there to try to put it out. That's how she got burned. He knew enough, 8 years old, knew enough to call 911 and give a credible report to dispatch. Pretty amazing stuff. Week after next, I'll see a 10-year-old, okay? And again, I'm talking about kids, but they're how do I say this? They're the ones we think about doing prevention messaging for, which is great, but adults get burned too. We could use the same messaging. 10 years old, excuse me, doing some things with aerosol cans that he should not have been. Hooray, 10-year-old boys. Exploded. He had a good 15-20% burn to face, neck, chest, arm, shoulder. And what kept it to be a 20% burn versus a 50% burn is he remembered from school, stop, drop, and roll. He remembered that part. Does this make sense? So here's my thought. The things that you guys rattled off to me about safety, about grease, well, number one, for Thanksgiving, how about let's not cook with grease? How about let's order out or use an air fryer instead as examples, okay? Or if we are going to do it, having the pot lid. These are great things to know, but even better things to share with your loved ones, with your community members, with your church, or whatever. Does this make sense? I invite you to take that part seriously, because one person, just me, I'm not going to be able to get messaging out to 11 million people in the state of North Carolina. But you have people that you care about, you don't want to see them burned either. This would have made a difference for JJ. Okay, so unfortunately it didn't, so he got injured. That's what the call was. So riddle me this, from a responding to the call, you haven't gotten there yet, but what are you worried about already for care priorities? Talk to me.
Airway.
So I agree, be specific. What is it that you're concerned about for airway?
Swelling.
That we're worried that swelling, if it's not there yet, will be soon, based on what at least what I'm hearing. Okay, keep going. I agree entirely. What else could be a concern and or a priority? Well, yeah, so pain control, and that is it's a real thing. It could be very painful. I'm going to offer that the pain management will be part of your secondary after dealing with the life-threatening stuff. It's a real thing, yes, but threat to life and limb, and then we can manage pain after. What else could be a threat to, again, primary-ish, ABC's-ish?
Covering the burn so it doesn't get infected or have
bacteria get into it?
We ultimately are going to need to do something with the wound, absolutely. But again, I'll offer, it's a strange thing, I love burns, but I'm going to offer the burn immediately. It's not going to be the immediate threat to life, okay? We don't know, but that's the story we got. Does what we see match the story we got? Is this a non-accidental trauma? I don't know, but I'm going in, radar on, eyes open to see, does the story match with what I see in the flesh? He's 2. Did the pot conk him in the head as it came down? Is this maybe a head injury as well? I don't know. So we're keeping an open mind. I will no doubt see the scald, but what I don't want is for that to distract me from a methodical approach of all of the things I need to be looking for. Does that make sense? That's what I want to impress, among other things. So this is what you see. And there was scalding here from eyebrow down and around to the, including some of the ear, the face. This is based on this. We know it's blistered and it's pink underneath, whitish, and includes the neck. So if there is swelling, there's going to be loss of airway in short order. So in this case, the folks who responded, they elected to get an ET tube in sooner rather than later. Now the word on the street per Leslie and Pam is tubing adults, not kids. This scope, yes. However, say again. Unfortunately. It is what it is. I'm not here to change that per se, but if you're concerned about this, I'm asking because I don't know, or I want to see what you know. If you cannot intubate this kid, you yourself, what would you do? What
We do have
bridge. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We do have pediatric King Airways.
Okay, so blind airway insertion device, King or otherwise. Go ahead.
It depends on how far down the edema goes.
Sure.
As to whether that
Right.
device is going to be.
So is there something else that could be a bridge other than an ET tube? Either, again, a basic adjunct or blind insertion device. Go ahead.
It sounds extreme, but cranking is not out of the option.
Well, sure, if we progress, etc., and I would offer also this, how do I say, if I see this, even without the ET tube, I'll be personal with you, my anal sphincter shrinks to the size of a pinhead, right? This is some pucker. So all my available resources, besides myself, I'm going to go ahead and mobilize those. Does that make sense? All right, we want a bird, right? So that might be the correct approach for this. Now, we've gotten the ET tube placed in this scenario, and we presume for our purposes that's definitive management of the upper airway. And I'm being very specific with that language, because this may not address lower airway problems. Does this make sense? We're going to talk about that extensively later. So I've addressed upper airway. What other threats to life and limb are you worried about? Well, we talked about the extent of the burn, wanting to get something on there. So let's have a look at what else we've got. Okay, so this is torso burns, and this is left forearm, hand, etc., etc. So we're not experts, we're not CPS, but does what you see conceivably match with the story that was given to dispatch? Yeah, I mean, this is your classic pattern. One of the hands tends to be the dominant hand, whatever. Face, neck, anterior torso, etc. Okay? What else would you like to know that I haven't given you yet?
Body surface area.
Yeah, so total body surface area. I'll offer this. Can we say right now that this is a significant burn?
Absolutely.
Even if I don't have a TDSA to point to, and this is heresy, but I'm going to suggest to you your thorough burn map, the actual percentage, for my purposes, that's going to be secondary survey. That's going to be after immediate threat to life and limb. Because let's agree, securing my airway would have trumped having a close, accurate sense of the burn. Does that make sense? Not that you can't chew gum and walk at the same time, but we prioritize the things immediate life and limb. Okay. What else would you like to know?
Is he alert?
Okay, yeah, lovely. And this presumes before the tube went and all that good stuff, right? But all right, so is he alert? What's his mentation? Is he age appropriate? Is he scared towards a caregiver? How does he interact with strangers, et cetera, et cetera? Is he comfortable with mom, less so with boyfriend, baby daddy, Uncle Fred, whoever was watching, whatever, okay? Absolutely. So mental status, age appropriate, etc. What else? What do you think?
Blood pressure's important, there's been a fluid shift, obviously, with swelling.
Sure. So this is going to give us some metrics. We won't know all of the answers to all of this, but we know we're going to grab vital signs as well. If I don't have blood pressure yet, do I have some physical assessment markers for perfusion?
Capillary refill.
Yeah, so your cap refill, the color, et cetera, et cetera. You guys with me on this? So these are things you're doing organically all at once. I get that. But keep in mind, ABCs, the things that I'm focused on, are the immediate threats to life and limb. Airway loss is my scary one. Am I worried about hemorrhagic shock here?
Hypovolemic shock, definitely.
Hypovolemic, but am I worried about hemorrhagic? Based solely on the pictures in my story, at the moment, not really, right? So I'm not looking at a killer bleed, hemorrhagic shock, but I am worried about hypovolemia.
And hypothermia.
That is, and I love that you said hypothermia. This sounds goofy, but particularly for kids, I sound like the witch from Hansel and Gretel, that story, because I like my kids warm, pink, and sweet. I like my kids warm, pink, and sweet, because those are three things. Any one of those things is not true, you're going to have trouble in short order here, okay? So, a cold kid, this is problematic, okay? So yes, keep them warm, keep them warm, keep them warm. We'll come to that as well. Hypovolemia versus hemorrhagic problems. How is the hypovolemia from burn different than the hypovolemia from hemorrhagic scenario where there's my blood all over there?
Hypovolemic is fluid volume loss. This burns is third space and that fluid into it.
All right, so I still have the fluid in my body for the most part, but it's in the wrong place, right? We call it third spacing, where the intravascular volume plasma has leaked out to the interstitium, fluid shifting, edema, or as my friend Ernie would have said, they become all swole, right? Technical term.
Love it though.
It's true. Let's say again. What's say again? I'm sorry.
I said I love it though.
I know it's great. It's very descriptive. We all know exactly what we mean by that. They all swole. Yeah. So this influences how you provide resuscitation fluid. Who's responded to a hemorrhagic shock case? Busted pelvis, gunshot wound, whatever. All right. What have you done in those cases where the patient's bleeding out, or in some cases bleeding in, let's say retroperitoneal or abdominal? What have you done?
Gave him blood.
Yeah, so blood sooner rather than later, and until you have blood, maybe you've bridged with some crystalloid, but we know they're going to need blood because they bled out blood. Does this make sense? This is quite different for burn shock, because what they've lost from the inside the blood vessels is not blood per se, it's the plasma. Okay? Talk to me about the blood that's left. Well, it's ketchupy blood. Right? Again, it's an analogy, but it's hemoconcentrated. Does this make sense? So for an uncomplicated burn, meaning it's not a polytrauma, they've got bleeding on top of burn, but if it's just burn, blood products is not your go-to, right? You're wanting to turn the ketchupy blood into Kool-Aid blood. And how do you do that? It's, well, fluids, crystalloids, right? Crystalloids is the way to go, okay? Having said that, if it's a polytrauma, burns plus bleeding out, well, the bleeding out part is going to trump the burn part. Does this make sense? So I'm not saying never blood for burns, but uncomplicated burns, crystalloid is the way to go for the dilutional effect. So let's keep trucking with some stuff here. We're going to return to JJ a couple of times, but we'll back this up into our approaches for formalizing what we've just done. Okay? So this is, I don't know, I think Pam had raised her hand earlier, but has taken AVOS at some point previously. Ernie used to coordinate these courses. Again, since he's retired, I've just started the job since January. I used to teach with him, but I'm rebuilding my infrastructure of instructors. We hope to, by second quarter of 2022, be able to start offering the full-fat 8-hour classes again to the community, Cumberland County included, so stay tuned in that regard. But this is meant to be the condensed essence of that, okay? So these are things that you would do on a routine basis. Starting here, what is it about this picture, or I should say, how would you approach scene safety and et cetera, if that's the scene that you're rolling up on?
Far away.
Okay, well, we're assessing from far away. Tell me more and tell me why.
Looking for down power lines, anybody on the ground, mechanism of injury.
Okay, and so there's two things that are lovely here. One, certainly you could be the secondary victim, so there are other things that are a safety threat for me. But second, before you ever touch the patient, you know a lot about probable causes of injury. Okay, so talk to me about what you're suspecting if the bucket truck is still up, but the line worker's down here on the ground.
You fall down, go boom.
He fall down and go boom. I love this. We'll write that down. Fall down and go boom.
The bucket probably hit the power line charged from the truck.
Well, yeah, so it could be that the bucket and the truck itself is still in contact with lines, perhaps.
Everything's
Or
working.
you forgot to ground yourself.
Absolutely, there's multiple variety of things, but if he's on the ground, then fall, that's a significant height, so now we're talking very high risk of polytrauma, right? Musculoskeletal, neuro, whatever. Y'all okay with that? Which means as I roll up, even if you see some gnarly burns, don't be distracted by the burn part. Do your thorough, methodical approach to ABCs, etc. Okay? In terms of scene safety, how about this scenario? What would your thought process be for scene safety and your across the room assessment before you ever touch a patient? If they know there was a chemical whatever and you roll up and there's about 3 or 4 guys dressed like that,